This is the eLearn podcast. If you're passionate about the future of learning, you're in the right place. The expert guests on this show provide insights into the latest strategies, practices, and technologies for creating killer online learning outcomes. My name's Ladek, and I'm your host from OpenLMS. The eLearn podcast is sponsored by eLearn Magazine, your go-to resource for all things online learning. Click-by-click how-to articles, the latest in EdTech, a spotlight on successful outcomes and trends in the marketplace. Subscribe today and never miss a post at elearnmagazine.com. And OpenLMS, a company leveraging open source software to deliver a highly effective, customized, and engaging learning experience for schools, universities, companies, and governments around the world since 2005. Learn more at openlms.net. Hello, everyone. My name's Ladek, and my guest for today is Andrew Berry, who's the founder of Curious Lion Learning. In this very cultural conversation, Andrew and I talk about what a learning culture advisory group like Curious Lion does, and the origin, twists, and turns Andrew has experienced over the last 5 years as the company has evolved from what he thought it would be to its current focus on providing Cohort Based Courses, or CBCs. We also talk about how a company can go from lip service to championing investing in their people by cultivating a learning culture and the key factors that make or break success. Andrew and I also talk about how recognizing and capturing shared stories are critical for creating shared purpose and building culture in an organization. Andrew and I also talk about bottom-up versus top-down learning and the pros and cons of each, and how you can leverage having a point of view about learning in general. We finish our conversation around how you can scale the CBC model in large organizations or institutions, and what those factors for success and typical fails might really be. And remember, we record this podcast live so that we can interact with you, our listeners, in real time. If you'd like to join the fun every week on LinkedIn or Facebook or YouTube, just come over to elearnmagazine.com and subscribe today. And now, without further ado, I give you Andrew Berry. Andrew, how are you today?
I'm good, Ladek. How are you, man?
I am fantastic. I love that you also put Curious Lion in there, because that is the company that you founded, work for, do all of the magic for. Where do we find you sitting? Where are you in the world?
I am in Middletown, New Jersey. So it's the North New Jersey shore.
I'm going to guess that you're not from there.
I am not. Yeah. Well, you nailed it. Believe it or not, I've been here. I lived in Manhattan for about 12 years before this. And so this is our first year down here. So yeah, it's about 12 years in the States, but I don't know if you can guess where I'm originally from.
Tasmania.
Wow. At least you didn't say Australia. No, South Africa.
That's, you know what? I think I knew that. I did know that, right? On South Africa, sure.
Yeah, Cape Town, South Africa.
Cape Town, South Africa. I have had the pleasure of flying through Joburg. And I've even been to Lesotho, but for some reason, I never, stepped outside and actually experienced South Africa. I'm very disappointed in that.
Well, that's something we'll have to rectify in the future.
Absolutely. But yeah, North Shore, New Jersey. And many people who have listened to this podcast before know, I mean, I lived in Hoboken for a couple of years, and I worked down in now Asbury, near Asbury Park there.
Yeah, so you know this area well. Yeah, I used to live in Hoboken as well.
Fantastic. All right, cool. Andrew, now that you're on the North Shore of Jersey and Curious Lion has followed you there, obviously, tell us about, give us the 30 to 60 seconds of what Curious Lion is and what you do.
Yeah, so we're a learning culture advisory firm, fully remote. We're 12 people right now. And we work with typically B2B SaaS companies that are in a sort of early growth or high growth stage. And we help them create systems for learning so that their people can learn bottoms up instead of top down.
And I love that you nailed it there, because that's what we're going to talk about. I want to know the difference between bottom up and top down learning. But before we go there, I want to first compliment you on, as we always do, you do a little research on who you're going to talk to on these podcasts and whatnot. I love that the first thing that you see on the Curious Lion website, it says, learning isn't the transformation isn't the transfer of information. It's the transformation of the learner. I got to tell you, I don't mean to be sappy on a Thursday, right? We're recording this on, top of June, Thursday, but
Yeah.
that's powerful stuff, because when you come right down to it, right? Like tell me why did you put that out there? Why is that so important to you?
Yeah. So this started from me. I started Curious Lion 5 years ago. Okay. When I first started it, I think as most people who start companies, I had a great idea of what I thought the market wanted. And I went out there to create better top-down training. We were going to do, beautifully produced, high quality video production, better instructional design approaches. We were looking at, I was looking at, it was just me at the time, basically, but I was looking at AR and VR and, these kind of things like, okay, how can we improve this top-down approach to training? But what I realized, and I actually learned this the hard way, and that I slowly started building a team. We got to 4 people at one point, and I got a message in 2019 from one of them saying, I'm leaving. And at that point, there was another one. It was almost had a foot out the door. And so I was faced with losing half the team. And, if they had left, we would have been screwed, because we had all these, client projects and deadlines and all that to meet. And so what I realized is that I wasn't developing them. I wasn't mentoring them. I wasn't coaching them. They weren't learning from each other. We and still are a remote team, but they were completely siloed from each other. They were left on their own to figure stuff out. And I was creating content for them as well and putting it out there, but I was just sort of expecting them to absorb it, and to internalize it. And we weren't discussing it. We weren't getting together and figuring out, what it meant to us. And people weren't taking time to reflect and all these good things. And so at the time, I was also getting into the world of, those who've been following, there's this big rise of cohort based courses from the creator economy, right? So this is the CBCs that are coming up in that space. And so I joined a whole bunch of them, and I spent an excessive amount of money on online courses.
But pause for just a second, and I want you to continue. But for those who don't know, what's a CBC? What does that mean?
Yeah, so CBC is the sort of coined term for cohort based course.
And okay, so cohort based course. Okay, cool.
Yeah, so these like time bound. People come together for 4 to 8 weeks and learn in live sessions with each other.
Which not ironically, but it's literally the antithesis of the MOOC, right? The massive online course, where it's just like, hey, 1 million people show up and just kind of go through this self-directed learning, which clearly doesn't work. It's horrible.
Exactly, which is lecture. And so that was when I started to apply, because I've been in adult education and corporate training. I was a consultant at KPMG for many years. So for I don't know, back then it was like 12 years or so. And so I started applying. I started dissecting what they were doing well in cohort-based courses. I started writing about that online, got on a lot of entrepreneurs who were running these courses, noticed it. I started working with them. I eventually ran my own course of 150 people last year, teaching them how to create online courses. Anyway, so this was like a bit of a distraction, a bit of a side business to our main work, working with companies. But I learned a lot on, the thing with online course creators is they are pushing the boundaries of education, but are doing it through market forces. Like the best people are, they're not self-selected, but the market decides who's doing well and rewards those that are really pushing the boundary, right? Because it's really hard to sell an online course and to run a successful one. And so I was seeing that these ones that were phenomenally successful were doing some really cool things. And what they were doing was the antithesis, like you said, of what we had been doing to that point with companies. And what they were doing was quite simple. They were bringing people together to talk about their experiences through a common language that was provided by the instructor, by the course creator. And they were building things. We were creating things. I joined courses that helped me better take notes. I joined courses that helped me become a better writer, better speaker. And so everything was about doing those things, getting feedback from people, applying different principles, and just making, that deliberate practice approach that Anders Ericsson talks about. And it just made so much sense. And so I went back to one of our clients at the time, one of our earliest clients, PagerDuty, and I pitched this idea to. Did you just?
Sorry for the comic break, but did you just say pager duty?
Yeah.
And not like as in like the old school pagers.
I mean, I think that's where it originated from.
Holy
Yeah, so they're
smokes.
like an incident. Yeah,
That's awesome. That's fantastic. Sorry.
it's great. Their mascot is Pagey. It's like a little pager.
That's
It's
awesome.
so cool. It's cool, and they do like incident response stuff for
Okay.
engineering teams.
All
Yeah.
right, cool. Yeah, and that makes total sense, right?
So I think
Because you're
that's where
you're
right.
the person who's on call, and like you get the beep, and like you've got to respond within 30 seconds because of course,
Exactly.
because the servers are all down or like that building is on
Right.
fire or something like that.
Exactly.
Nice.
So they're also very forward thinking in their culture and their approach to developing people. And I'm lucky enough to work with someone there, Felicia Jones, who's phenomenal. People should definitely give her a follow on LinkedIn, look her up. She's a pioneer in a lot of this stuff. And so I pitched this idea to her, and she loved it. She saw the potential for it. So we ran, and then this was key because I needed an opportunity to like put this into practice to see if it would work in a company setting. And so we piloted it back in probably early 2020, actually maybe even late 2019, with six of their EVPs, executive vice presidents, who, exceptionally busy people, head of finance, head of HR, product, like come together. She handpicked those six, which was key to the later success of it. And we put them through a 6-week program that they met once a week. And they did 3 things. And this kind of teases out the model a bit for people. So those 3 things were they would consume some content, asynchronously in their own time. The goal of that was just to give them a common language. So I'll use an example. We introduced them to Carol Dweck's growth mindset, fixed mindset model. And it was, we probably pulled her TED talk on the topic, maybe find some blog posts, like nothing fancy, right? Just give people, we're not aiming to test them on what are the 6 features of growth mindset, blah, blah, blah. It's just to give them a common language to talk about this. And what this is performance management, right? That was kind of the topic, like how to better develop and performance manage team members. So growth mindset, fixed mindset. So they consume this content, and we had a few others in there, right? To give them a common language. Then part 2, they reflect, and each person takes the time. And this is like, in corporate settings, this hardly ever happens, right? So this was a big new thing for people. Block 20 minutes on your 30 minutes on your calendar, reflect on what you've just consumed. What does it mean to you? Think about someone on your team, who's showing this mindset, who's not, how can you have a conversation, like those kind of things. So basically what people have come out of that, step 2 is they come out with like their own case study of what they're working on, which is then incredibly powerful, because then the third piece and final piece is the live session. So instead of us having to design a scenario, Joe meets Jim and Sarah, and this is, like some kind of like made up example.
They come to it with these case studies that they already have in their own team.
Exactly. Right. And so that was incredibly powerful. And so the facilitation of those sessions became very straightforward. It was just get these people in a room and get them talking. And they talked like they couldn't stop. And so we did this. They would meet once a week, right? So it was like 6 weeks, and there were 3 topics. So there was that consumption, reflection, meet once a week, go and take action, and then meet and debrief that. So that was like a 2-week sprint, and then we did that 3 times, and it was insane. People loved it. Like, they couldn't get enough of this experience. We set up a Slack channel for those 6 people. They still to this day meet and talk about it. They all still work at the firm, which was huge for Felicia, right? She, like, the retention was amazing. Those people have now been advocates of this in their teams. And so through this process, PagerDuty has been able to scale this approach, this cohort-based approach to learning. So that's kind of it. And that's when our business turned around for the better. And we've just, as I said, grown from 4, almost losing, 2 of them, to 12 people we are now, and still growing.
I love it. So the second half, I'm going to now, first of all, beautiful story. I love the Genesis story, right? It's as someone who's a diehard entrepreneur myself, I just love hearing when, the aha moment for you, right? And how it really was serendipity, right? It was serendipity brought you there, but you were able to grab the horns and shape it into what is now your business, which is absolutely fantastic. And we're both in the learning space here. That's what we're in. Another part, I'm just going to take us back to this is your landing page. This is the front page of your website, right? You first talk about the transformational learner, but then this is the first time I've ever seen somebody say we're a learning culture advisory firm.
Mm.
Right? A lot of people, learning culture, we've heard that, thrown around and whatnot. You've just described it in, not in specific terms in that story that you just told about when does, an EVP ever have 20 minutes to reflect or is given the runway to do that, right? Before we go into the top down, bottom up, top down, framework and those kinds of things, talk to me about how important it is in the clients that you've worked with now or are working with, or the conversations you've had over the last 10 years. Because everyone will say, yeah, look, we invest in our people. We want people to, how much of it is lip service? How much of it is it not? And what's the moment? Is there a factor or two or three factors that actually transforms a company from lip service to actual action? And then secondly, what different types of learning cultures are there? I know that the second one's kind of a totally different question.
Yeah.
But are there different kinds of learning cultures?
Yeah. So good ones and bad ones. So that's a really good double question there. So first of all, one of the things we've realized is that you don't create a learning culture, you cultivate one, right? So there's a learning culture exists no matter what. And it's, what is it? It is the sort of commitment and willingness of people to see learning opportunities everywhere and to take ownership of their own learning, and to mentor each other through that process. So kind of this idea of the journey that everyone's on, and we're all at slightly different points of that journey, and we learn best from those just a step ahead of us, and we're the best teachers for those just a step behind us. Right. So that's kind of like when a whole company is coming together to do that. And so, yeah, you've got good and bad learning cultures. I think what is the first question was kind of like what's.
So what's the factor that you've seen with your clients that shift from lip service about, hey, we invest in our people, we have, we want people to learn, the shift from actually, from saying it and having the resources to one where it's like you can really feel it, like, oh my gosh, this team actually grows every year, or when we have a new cohort come in and during their intake process, you can feel like, oh yeah, they know it. Like, is there a factor you've seen that actually makes that shift?
Yeah, so there's a few. I'd say like the most important ones. We're actually busy working on a diagnostic for this. So we want to really try and objectively measure healthy learning cultures across companies. I'd say for me, like some of the key things that have to be in place are, tone at the top is such a cliched way, but leadership demonstrating certain things. What is that? They need to be showing vulnerability. They need to be sharing mistakes that they're learning from, because that's the learning opportunity, right? When you make a mistake or there's some sort of failure, like turning that into a learning opportunity is one of the key aspects of the learning culture. So the leadership doing that, and then therefore creating, this is the second piece, a sort of safe environment of trust that people can go and take risks, run experiments, learn from them. For those out there that are listening to this and going like, that sounds like the Wild West, I would never want my company to run like that. There are other aspects, right? Another piece is like having clear decision-making processes, so people know where sign-offs are needed and where they aren't, and where their sort of boundaries are. So you do need some boundaries, but having those in place gives people still that room to be creative, to take risks, and to learn, right? So that those are two or three, I think I said, key things. Another one that's we started to realize is so important is the intentional management of knowledge. So when people come together, there's a difference between sort of knowledge that can be put into a book, right, and like learned, and then there's tacit knowledge, which is like the nuanced, dealing with people, being in complex, ambiguous environments like B2B sales, for example, for our clients. those kind of things you can't write a textbook on, right? Every situation is different. Everything's unique. It's so people-based. Like there's just so many things that go into that. But I think a lot of people also recognize that there are, I'd say this collectively, people within a company have the answers to these questions, right? There's some people with a lot of experience, some that bring experience in from outside, others that look at things in new ways. You've got innovation. These are all like characteristics of a learning culture, right? So collectively, if people have the answers, how can we create a system that brings them together that to like surface those answers, basically? So, and that's what happened in that example I talked about at PagerDuty and in all our clients, is that when people are coming together to share these things, someone's saying, I've got this issue with this client. They're just so stuck up on this one issue. I can't get them over the line here. Invariably, someone else has had that same challenge, right? Or a similar one, and they can share what's worked or what hasn't worked in the past. And so the point I was making was around knowledge management. So how do you capture that sort of information? How are you capturing it in a way that it's findable and usable by someone else the next time that issue comes up, right? Because pretty much every objection in the world has been out there. Every invention, every idea. This is like maybe a somewhat controversial opinion, but I don't think there's such a thing as an original idea. It's all been out there. It's just remixed and maybe looked at it from a different perspective, right? And so if we sort of acknowledge that and say our company of people have that knowledge already, the learning culture, our approach to learning culture is of cultivating it is how do we bring those people together to share that knowledge in a way that everyone can benefit.
I'm going to endorse what you said. I think they're probably original ideas, but at the end of the day, what we find ourselves, and we're going to go deep down the rabbit hole here if we want to, but ultimately it's, human survival or human flourishing is really the only question that we're ever really answering. Right. And so I mean, if we want to get profound on why are you getting up in the morning, at the end of the day, if it's a widget that you're building that's answering some problem or, solving some problem for somebody somewhere that allows them or their business to flourish and therefore survive better and whatnot. Right. So
that's actually, I mean, that's a great point. I actually want to just reinforce that and tie it back to your earlier question of like, which of those companies that are not just paying lip service, but actually doing something about it. It's capturing those, we call those, we don't just call them, but we call them shared stories. So those are specific examples, right? Stories of people in the organization doing a thing that had an impact on a customer or on the community or on whatever. It's examples of best practice of what great looks like for that role or that function. And part of our work is capturing those and creating a story bank of those, because, and then we'll we'll deliver that out through a podcast or, lots of different ways. But that is that's how you get tacit knowledge, right? When you can see the impact and you're like, oh, I want to make that kind of a difference. And you can then sort of figure out very quickly what the person did and internalize it much better.
And to your tagline, right? That's also building culture, right? Like not only internally do people start attaching themselves to the stories. I love, this is something I've spoken about many times myself, like the idea of shared experience. It's so important to us as a human animal, right? Like, this is what we relate. This is the reason why memes happen, right? It's a shared experience. Like we begin to share it. But then, gosh, when you get to a support experience, for a client or a customer, you have these stories. You can say, well, actually over at XYZ company, we did this, or actually over, here's, we did this. And then you flip it around to the sales side and they become solid gold for a sales, function as well, where it's just like, well, let me show you all of the different ways that people are happy or satisfied or problems were solved or challenges overcome or new ideas came into fruition.
That's
like we should start a consulting company and go sell this to somebody. I'm not sure.
I mean, hey, look, I'm open to new principles. I mean, you nailed another aspect of it. Is cross-functional, right? So when the whole company is doing that, one of the things we do is customer mapping. So what are all the touch points a customer has with people, right? And you said like customer success is that on the one end, it's feeding back into sales on the front end and the SDRs before that. And so having that whole like map journey mapped out, and then making sure there's consistency across people, and that it's not even like, that sounded very top down again. It's more like enabling them to come together to establish consistency amongst themselves. That's what bottoms up learning is all about.
I was going to say, take me there. So let's definitively answer right now, like juxtapose bottom up versus top down learning. And is it something that, if I'm the head of L&D or I'm the head of people or whatever, or the head of training at a company right now and listening to, is this something that I can grab myself onto? Is this a skill I can learn? Is this something that's been sitting in front of me this whole time and I just need to think about it differently? Like help us understand. I mean, or do we need to come hire Curious Lion? What do we need to do?
Yeah, no, well, so a big part of what we do, and let me just start there. So I'm a big believer in creating the category, and everything that we put out there and the stuff I write on LinkedIn and all that is about promoting the category. I'm not saying we are always the experts at this. I think there's lots of different ways to do this. We have a very strong point of view on it, right? And so I think that's important that we are advocating for this approach rather than like our approach, if that makes sense. Because I'm learning all the time, right? People interacting with me on LinkedIn, especially, it's been fantastic because I get a lot of like ideas and feedback from people of what they've done well, so that goes back to. Well, but
it's really great to hear you describe this because it's weird. I don't know why this trade this, but it harkens back when I did my MBA, a century ago. There's this one professor and she was a finance professor, and I just asked her, like, so how do you think about this? Is there a strategy? Is there a framework? And she's just like, I have a view, and this. So I present the view, and I'm always adding to it and subtracting, but excuse me, but this is the view, and this is kind of what you're describing here. Where when you come into a situation, you're like, look, we have decided, like, we're going to take this approach. There isn't a answer, but there's an approach here. Am I describing that correctly?
That's 100%. And that's a lifelong learning mindset, right? Like and I know that our work will never be complete, or that's not the right way to say it. It'll never be done. Like we'll always be learning. Every time we work with a client, every single time will be better. We're building up, we're developing that pattern recognition, all of those kind of things that help us do this better. So there's a meta thing going on here as well, because that's the mindset we're trying to create at our clients, right, amongst people. So bottoms up, top down, right? So that approach is very bottoms up, by the way. Like me putting that stuff out on LinkedIn, I'm doing it I'm like learning out loud and doing it in a way to get feedback and see what's resonating and what other people are doing and sort of constantly developing it. And I try and support others in by sharing my ideas. So that's kind of an essence of the bottoms up approach. Everything we've talked about. Let me just define top down for like, and if you feel free to add to this as well, but it's that like traditional training that we're all used to, right? And especially like compliance training is the worst at this because it's just to check the box, right? So there's really no need to do anything else. But it's sage on the stage, lecture-based 60-minute webinars that are just a lecture, someone reading you a slide deck, like just give me the book, I'll read it. Like, I don't need someone else to read this to me type of thing. It's that transfer of information, right? As opposed to transforming the learner.
Can I get a visual? And you can, if this resonates with you, please steal it.
Go for it.
And this literally just popped in my head. If you find yourself sitting down and looking forward at a screen, at a person or whatever, being prepared to receive information, that's top-down learning, right? Like you're expecting it's like, you see, but if you find yourself sitting down and turning to the left or the right to talk to someone, I think that would be bottom up, right? Whereas like it's more on the peer experience. This is cohort, right? This is
exactly.
Like it's more about let's discover together and let's create learning together. There's another woman that we've had on the show several other times. Her name is Michelle. She used to work for My Learning Consultant. She now works for Moodle USA, but this is her, huge mantra. It's like, why are you even creating the content? Why aren't you asking your students to essentially build the course with you or build the material with you? And you're going to discover so much more that way, right?
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. I love that analogy of like, if you're just passively consuming something, and just staring at a screen versus like interacting with people. And so it's like, to us, so top down becomes then, if you sort of like zoom out, it's like that's top down. That's where people often stop, right? Okay, we're cool. We've done a needs analysis. We figured out people need to know this thing. We packaged up a really solid 90-minute webinar and teaches them everything they need to know, present it. Cool, we're done, right? Let's go on to the next needs analysis kind of thing. So now if you zoom out of that saying, okay, but what if that's just one part of it? What if we then say, here's the recommended reflection, like give them prompts to reflect on that piece. Well, first of all, not make it 90 minutes, right? Like let's get serious about that. Like let's figure out what is the essential common language that they need to develop. What's the mental model or framework that they need to be introduced to? And then say, well, what should they reflect on? Give them some prompts for that, get people reflecting. And then what should they be doing to put to practice this? So thinking about that, what's some examples of that? And then sharing. So there's reflecting, doing, sharing. I talk about this circle of learning. So if you picture like doing's in the middle, that's sort of actually the first step. Like what should you do with this information? Then if you're reflecting after that, you're reflecting on not only what you just consumed, but also the doing part, right? So then the circle expands a bit more. So now you're doing and reflecting. Then sharing, to your point, looking at people to each side of you, you're now, when our thoughts are somewhat of an echo chamber, right? Even if we write them down, writing them down helps because it forces you to clarify your thinking, but it's still just your thinking. So now you're bringing in other people, you're getting feedback, your ideas are challenged. You may realize you don't understand it fully, right? So now you have to explain it better to people. And so then sharing, so you're taking on all these other points. You're learning from people one step ahead of you as well. And then finally, the fourth thing that we add to this circle of learning is teaching. So, and I sort of touched on that already, but like then the ability to then explain and share your experience with others helps you learn better because you start to like see what resonates. That's me writing on LinkedIn, right? I'm teaching what I'm learning, and then I'm getting feedback, and I'm learning more, right? And then of course now imagine everyone in the company is doing this. Everyone is doing reflecting, sharing, and teaching. Each one teach one, like that company is unbeatable, right? Like it's a huge competitive advantage.
So in my mind, this sounds great for the 2 to maybe 50 employees, maybe 100 employees, right? Like it even sounds like it gets a little unmanageable at 100 employees. Take me to, why does this also work in Amazon or Walmart or even a middle-sized sort of decent company like a Slack or something? Well, I guess now they're Salesforce. Is it if I'm, again, the people that we're speaking with right now, the people who are listening are either professors and teachers and trainers, or they are they're L&D professionals. These are people who run these departments at corporations. For many of them, maybe like, how do I control that process? Do I care?
Yeah. So that's a great question. It's a question of scale, right? How do you scale something like this? So there is that last part of the question I think is important. Like there's some letting go. There's some autonomy that you have to kind of decentralize, right? That is important in this. But to answer the scaling question, the best way to do that, to kind of scale and let go of that sort of authority to control things, is through alumni mentors. So what we saw, so the PagerDuty example was great. They're over 1,000-person company now. Started with 6 people, and that particular topic, this is a certain management level track of training that they then rolled out. They took from those 6 people because my client did such a good job of picking those 6. She kind of knew like all of them would really embrace it and want to take it further, right? But not everyone's going to do that. But you'll get a bunch that really like this idea, this concept, and will be willing to lead future sessions. And it goes back to what I said earlier as well, that the facilitation part is not it's not a very onerous ask, because all you have to do is just basically bring people together, guide the conversation somewhat, and then they take over, right? The participants, the learners take over. So to scale this, it's basically picture you run it with 6 people, say 4 of them are interested in running it again. So then that's now 4 doing 6 more. So that's 24 people, right? And now you've got, say, 10 of those you want to run it again, and you do that. And so like that's how the best way this expands, because you've got that consistency, that golden thread of people that have been there since the first one, kind of know what the spirit is, how to run it, and then sort of accept the fact that every session is going to be different. If you're giving people the exact same mental models and frameworks, it'll immediately be different from the moment they reflect, right? Because everyone's situation is different. Then when they come together for that live session to share and teach each other, it'll be different. And that's great. That's fine, because it's helping them with that specific challenge. So it's taking the general, the mental model, and applying it to the specific. And right, and that's what you want, because then this is the other thing I talk about. We integrating learning and work. You're learning as you're working, and people leave these meetings with like a specific idea for a meeting with a client or a performance review with someone, or like so there's very practical outcomes.
What are the, we've already been talking for 35 minutes now. I love it. I love how the time always flies.
Yeah.
And we are both serious fanboys for this. I mean, this is obviously, what are the challenges? What are the challenges? How do people fall on their face? Where have you seen, companies fail at this? Or teams fail at it where, either it wasn't led properly, or like, what are the factors for success, and how do you make sure that, or I guess, what are the challenges to be successful with this?
Yeah. So that's a great question. There's 3 things off the top of my head that are important here. One is start small. So you don't want to run this for the 1,000 people population. Start with a pilot group, grow from there. Like that is so important. A lot of people want to rush into, like, you and I, we're so excited about this. Like you just want to roll it out to your company. That is a recipe for disaster. The wheels can come off, right? Because, and this is also like to my point that, we call them ours, that sort of whole approach I talked about, we call them cohort learning experiences, CLXs. That's our approach for doing it, but it's different in every client, right? There's certain nuances so like you've got to kind of run a pilot, see what works for your team. Like maybe setting up a Slack channel for people afterwards to talk through things isn't useful, at that company or whatever. Like, so you have to kind of like make those little tweaks. So start small. The next one is have someone dedicated as a sort of course manager. So there's a lot of moving parts to this, scheduling, setting up like the meeting rooms, making sure that the asynchronous content goes out in time, like making sure there's an easy place for people to get access to reflection questions and store them themselves, and helping to organize that whole process. So a lot of moving parts. That's key. Like have a dedicated person to do that. And you can train someone within, like that's also pretty key. So you don't have to hire from outside. And then the last thing is you get leadership involved. This is probably the biggest make or break for a thing like this, where the PagerDuty example, in that very first one, they had their CEO show up and just talk for 5 minutes at the beginning, just talking about why, talking about how much investment they put in this, why those people were so important, kind of making that link clear. And what she did really well, Jen, she does this a lot publicly as well, but she's just very open about her own struggles and challenges and stuff like that. So she set the tone for that by saying, like, whatever the thing was at the time, like just being very open about those conflicts and all that she was going through. So that's key, like leadership being involved and setting the tone for sort of vulnerability and being open to learning from mistakes. That kind of thing was so key, because then it gives everyone else permission to do that.
For sure. I've also heard as well that not only, because again, that goes back to learning culture, right? Like when you have the person or the people at the top say, this is acceptable and I'm going to participate, it's a huge breath of relief for everyone else, right? Or it's an open invitation for others as well. What about consistency? I've heard before that, if you want change to happen, if you want, a new policy to go through and really be effective, like it's something that you have to communicate as leadership literally till you're blue in the face, right? Like even though you think you've said it 20 times over the last 3 months, but really you need to say it 200 times over the next 6 months for it to actually has that been your experience to like bend culture, to change it, to move it?
100%. That's such a key point. And it's leadership doing that. So constantly demonstrating what we just talked about, talking about the importance of these programs, but also just the cadence of the programs. So running these cohort learning experiences. So for those listening, I'm going to sort of try and like paint a visual picture in our minds, but think of the cohort learning experience as the sort of container for what you said, shared experiences, right? Bringing people together. Now picture a whole bunch of those lined up one after the other, and think of that as a learning program. So that's like a series of these cohort learning experiences. So you might have one on, growth mindset, right? You might have one on how to give feedback, one on delegating. All of those together is part of a program that is about making people better managers. Okay. Then look at that as so basically then think of it like another program that's for how to effectively close deals in the sales process, and another one that's for customer success. So what all of the collection of those programs is the learning system. So you're starting to develop habits and routines of learning a new mental model, reflecting on how it can be applied to your situation, and discussing it with others and taking action. And that's the system. That's bottoms up learning, where people are innovating, they're problem solving, decentralized, right? They're coming up with new ideas for each other and for the business. And that's what starts to happen when it's the habits or the routine to do these things.
Fantastic. Andrew, there's one last question that I have for everybody that I bring on the podcast. Cool. And it's kind of a curveball, but all right. What are you excited about? You've got this company, you're growing, you clearly have a topic that you're passionate about, but individual, it could be in the learning space. It could be some new technology, it could be a shiny new object. It could be a process, an organization. What has you jazzed for the near term, like 6 months, 12 months out?
Wow. I mean, this has me jazzed forever. This is kind of like my, this is what keeps me going. And that's potential in others. I just think like I'm the underdog, right? Like the quiet person in your company that's doing incredible work, but not getting recognized. The individual contributor that has a really unique insight on a customer problem that no one's heard yet, that's sort of figured that out themselves. And the ability for those people to come together in a safe, trusted learning environment to share that knowledge with their colleagues, and for that knowledge to eventually spread throughout the organization and become common practice, so turning like common knowledge into common practice, and it all stemming from the potential in each individual. That'll keep you going doing this forever.
Fantastic. Andrew Barry, you are the founder, the creator of a company called Curious Lion. You are building learning cultures, or you're helping other companies to discover their learning culture and transforming learners all over the world. I can't thank you enough for taking time to be on the show today.
Ladek, so fun to talk about this stuff with you, man. I love what you're doing here.
Thanks again for joining me for the eLearn podcast. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. Just push subscribe on your player right now. And remember, you can join the conversation live on YouTube, Facebook, and my LinkedIn feed every week. I hope to see you there. Thanks.